Welcome to all you beautiful, sensitive, intuitive souls out there. This is Bevan Neiman Cortez, one of your co-hosts for this event. And I'm so honored to introduce you today to Dave Markowitz. One of his books was one of the first books I read when I found out that I was an empath. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. Dave helps empaths and highly sensitive people heal the deepest causative layers of pain, illness, and blockages. He works in alignment with your highest, most loving self and teaches you how to protect yourself from incoming energy and also how to safely heal energy that's already been absorbed. Welcome, Dave, to the summit. So happy to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. I didn't know that my book was among your first. I'm honored.
Yes. Actually, I loved your keyhole exercise where you can allow things to just flow through. That was very helpful for me in the early years. Thank you so much. And we have such a really great topic today about healing, right? So why empaths sometimes don't heal and how we can move past any blockages or pain or illness that we may be experiencing. And I would love for you just to start off, if you may, talking about the most common blockages to healing. What holds us back and how can we work through those things?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And, there are, it's a very individual, obviously, but of course there are a lot of commonalities. And one of the most common ones that I've seen is that we're using tools that we're taught. And I'd like to believe, from good intentioned people that just aren't in alignment with who we are. And what I've found by doing this, basically, it's almost like using a hammer where you need a screwdriver. If you're sensitive, empathic, and intuitive, you need tools that are aligned with that. So to that point, like you alluded to just a moment ago, if we are sort of walking sponges for other people's energy, and someone, again, well-meaning, assuming, comes by and you connect with that person and you go to that modality and they work with you and you feel better afterwards, that's fantastic, right? Who am I to judge that? And yet, as an empath and an intuitive, we also know that there's typically a lesson to be learned from the pain, from the blockage. And if we're just looking for symptom relief, fine. Again, I can't judge that. However, the people I work with are always looking to what's actually being called for here. And really what it comes down to for me is that if we're looking at symptoms of pain and illness as something to get rid of and something to fight at all costs, it's exactly what we're going to get, a very expensive fight. Whereas if we look at them with curiosity, what is this trying to show me? Is it possible this is sort of the red light on the dashboard of a car? It's showing me that I'm doing something or being a certain way that's not in my best interest. In that case, I can actually welcome what's there. To make it more tangible, I had a back pain for almost 2 decades, and it was pretty bad. And I went to lots and lots of practitioners with a very clear goal. How do I get rid of this? And I did all the physical modalities. And again, that's great if that's what you're into, but nothing really was working any more than just temporary relief. Eventually, when I became aware that there's such thing as medical intuition and energy healing, I started realizing, okay, what's really going on here? And when I tuned into my own body and I heard the message that I'd been feeling overly responsible for others, I was carrying that block in my low back. Well, once I work with that as if, as it actually was, on the causal level, energetically, emotionally, then after that, I haven't had back pain, the next 20 years. Granted, physical modalities can be helpful. I think when I started doing yoga, that was helpful as well. But the diagnosis that I had was a fusion, low back, L5 and S1. So yoga might be able to relax some of the muscles, and that's part of it. But what was making the muscles tight to begin with? So again, I had to figure out what that was, or more accurately, not figure it out, but allow the information to come. And I say that because figuring out is typically very left brain oriented, which has its place. So when we can look at things from an expanded point of view and really dive in, so to speak, from a place of curiosity, almost like we're looking through a microscope. What's really going on here? then I think we get the information that we need to do the healing. So we need to expand our awareness of what pain and illness is really about. And I found this with things way more serious than back pain. This is true with every ache, pain, diagnosis, you name it, that someone has come to me with. There's always an energetic and emotional aspect, and there's always a causal level. And I really stress that without working on the causal level, we're just, I don't know what's the phrase, or rearranging chairs on the Titanic, right? We're just going down and don't even know it. But we have those moments where we feel a little bit better, so we think, okay, this is helping, and in some ways it is, but at the same time, it's not really working on a root level.
Yeah, yeah. I also have had back pain for many years and done a lot of that work as well to really uncover what those root causes. So if someone is saying, I have this pain or this fatigue or an illness that just doesn't seem to go away, right? How can they begin, Dave, to ask those powerful questions and listen for the answers that are coming? How did that happen for you, and how's that happen for your clients?
Well, um, anything but through the mind. Okay. Right. So whether you're going to a medical intuitive or going to an energy practitioner, assuming you're both really open to the messages that come, you hold the intention and be willing to be wrong, because the mind has its ideas of what's actually happening there. And it's not always what's actually happening there. And on our own, I think anyone can have the ability to be their own medical intuitive. Of course, it takes tremendous discipline, consistency, and practice. No one just takes a weekend course in another language and all of a sudden is fluent in that. It takes years to get there. So over the years, and I get some people make like, I'd rather just pay someone to tell me the answer. But it doesn't mean that you're not capable of doing it. So when we're leaning in intuitively, I think with the energy of curiosity, it makes a big difference, and also surrendering. Sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes the root cause is so painful that we just don't want to see it. And it's not a conscious thing, right? It's more subconscious that says, this is too painful. This is a memory from my childhood of, X and Y trauma. And it makes sense in that respect that we don't really want to confront that. And yet it's there. So with practice, with persistence, and really through a loving, safe container that is typically best or easiest formed with at least two or more persons, as opposed to on the with your own self. I really found the answers can emerge by welcoming, again, the right information and feeling even more than thinking. And I think that's true with a lot of things. I'm sure you have experience with those kind of things as well, where something just shows up. You might have set an intention the day before or a year before. Things show up when they need to. I really think everything happens in divine timing. So a lot of people I work with have gotten frustrated because they're not getting to the root level. Symptoms keep coming back, sometimes in different areas of the body, but it's still the same root cause. And they're all messages, in my experience anyway. There's always a message there that says, okay, you could be doing this differently. And I look at it like that, really, and not like what I've been doing is wrong. That creates a lot of self-criticism, but most of the things that we've been doing, sometimes still are doing, are done unconsciously, right? So we don't want to blame ourselves. It's another thing that I really see. There's a lot of self-blame going around. We hear things like, oh, I didn't forgive my parents, that's why I have this pain, and that bring a self-criticism. I don't think that helps. I think we're better off looking at it like, what is really here for me? And everything I've done up until this point, as powerful as it might be, it's not getting to the deeper level, but that doesn't make me wrong or bad, right? I think we all just do the best we can. And self-criticism, I don't think really helps anybody, just kind of gets in the way. So we can be easier on ourselves. We have more access to our inner information as well.
Yeah, I think you're touching upon a really important point, which is that self-compassion during the healing process. And one of the things you say is that, we're not wrong or bad or broken. And sometimes when you're suffering in this way, and with whatever it is, you can feel that way. How can we take that sensitivity that we have, the hyper awareness of ourself, of our body, and use that as a gift rather than a burden?
Well, I think if we understand or even just open to the potential of it being a gift, then we can start seeing it that way. And it's very easy to um, get down about certain blockages, life challenges, physical symptoms, emotional traumas, etc. And I get that, but I also get that on a soul level. This is just my belief. I can't tell anyone else what else to, what they should believe. But my understanding is that everything that happens for a reason. And as some teachers who are much more profound than myself have said, that life is happening for you, not to you. And I think if we can really take on and open to that possibility, it makes it a lot easier to start looking at things. Okay, what is the gift in here? Or even to dare yourself to ask, what is the gift here? Am I getting anything out of this that I wouldn't be getting? And sometimes, secondary benefits can be attention and things like that. And again, those aren't wrong or bad. They're just things to look at and to work with. And, in that respect, we have a lot more information and we can, and through, empathic, I just, do a course with the Shift Network called the Skilled Empath, and talks all about like learning to see these things from a wider perspective, that these really are gifts. I mean, we tend to be very heart-centered and very compassionate. And, is there a better gift you can give anyone else or the world than your own heart, your own love, and your own compassion? So really by owning all these parts of ourselves, I think we can start bringing that out into the world.
Yeah, I would love to explore something you talked about just a few minutes ago, which is being a medical intuitive. How did you discover that this was one of your gifts? And how
Mhm.
did you, train and grow this part of yourself to be able to serve and to help other people heal?
Part of it was the last thing you just said, was really taking the focus off of me and really being in a place of honest service. Like, what is it that this person, what can I do or be for this person who's showing up, whether it's a friend or a client, et cetera? Um, I started out doing massage therapy and I started feeling while I'm working on someone's back, for example, I'd feel, that it's really tight. And if I tune in a little bit further, I would hear, feel, sense. It's a weird combination of senses that says, okay, this person is holding a lot of anger. Let's just say anger at their father. And sometimes I dared myself to speak that to the person who was on my massage table. And most of the time they were like, oh, wow, like, how'd you know that? And it was always, no one ever said that's not true. They either said, how'd you know that? What can we do about it? Or shut up. I only came here for a massage. Right. In nicer terms than that typically. But you get the idea. Not everyone wants what we're always wanting to give. So I think it's really important to really tune in and see, okay, what is it that my spirit's calling me to say or not say in this moment? But it really taught me that there's so much more going on to the physical body. And then through a lot of practice, I was able to just really feel in and see what's happening. And interestingly, when I had my empathic awakening after that, all the clients that were coming to me, this is after massage career, all the clients that were coming to me, instead of hearing, I'm angry at my father, I'm now hearing, I'm holding my father's anger. Okay? I'm holding my mother's grief, or I'm holding the collective unconscious grief. I'm holding X, Y, and Z of ABC person I've ever known. And that's when those practices came to me, as far as how do we really heal that, again, on a causal root level. So with practice, I think anyone can do anything. I mean, not anyone. I don't think I'll be playing basketball for the Knicks anytime soon, but within reason, most people can do a lot more than we think we can. Maybe the better way to put it.
Yeah, I understand completely. I loved basketball, but I was only 5'2". So these are the genetics that I've been given. But I really wanted to dive deeper into what you just talked about, which is instead of I'm angry at my father, I'm holding my father's anger. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit more about that, maybe subtle or not so subtle difference in how that manifests in the body and how we can heal those things or how we can release what we're holding, that energy that we're holding?
Totally. So um, it's really important to know the difference between the two, which in my experience can only really happen intuitively. I think the mind is always going to get in the way and probably try to find the thing that's the easiest way out, as opposed to what's the most effective way through. And they both, in those examples, can show up in various ways in the body. There's no this has to be this way kind of rule. At least I don't look at it that way. I think that's very insular and not opening to the full expansion or the full possibility. But as far as addressing the symptoms, it's night and day. So this goes back to the earlier point of why people don't heal. If you are holding, for example, your father's anger, and you're addressing it as if it's your anger towards him, again, it's sort of like using the hammer where you need the screwdriver or vice versa. You may get the job done. It's probably gonna be messy. You might bang your finger a couple of times. It might hurt a bit more than necessary. But when we can really see what's going on and use the right tools. So I'll just describe the tools really quickly here. When it's not yours, there's no reason to hang on to it, in which case you can, and I don't like to use the more casual let it go or just clear that kind of phrase. It seems almost dismissive of actually what's going on for me. But again, if someone wants to use that, that's fine. But what I found is by doing a conscious through a process that came to me, gosh, 10 plus years ago, through this process, we can actually give that energy back to who it belongs to, whether they're in the body or not. It's all done metaphysically. You don't have to call your dad and say, "Hey, by the way, I'm holding your, your anger. I'm going to give it back to you." Might not go over so well, but so that's why we do it all metaphysically. And I take people through visualizations and mini journeys to let that happen. And there are a number of steps in that I really found that are important to do each of the steps. That if we just kind of go to this very casual, I'm just going to give it back to the universe, it knows what to do with it. Well, granted, that might be effective, but typically, again, in my experience, that's a very short term solution. And if we're looking at pain and illness as opportunities to learn something, there's not much learning about holding other people's energies just by saying, oh, just give it back to the universe. It knows what to do with it. So that's why I want to take you through the process. It actually gives opportunities for specific forms of resistance to show up. And that's the key. That's really where we kind of target and work with so that the return can happen naturally, organically. And the end result of that is not only feeling better, sometimes very quickly, is that your body gets this learning, this very visceral experience, and basically says, I don't need to hang on to this energy any longer. I may have needed to when I was younger for any number of reasons, but in this moment and this moment forward, I don't need to. And I found certainly there's some power in affirmations, but there's a lot more power in a physical, visceral experience where someone has a shift, where even something like a back pain that's been there for years can be gone pretty quickly, or at least layer by layer. And you can get that real sense. And again, each time you do it, you're creating that learning. And to me, that's what it's about, working on the causal level. And so we can learn something, because again, that's why I think it's there. As far as if it is yours, we want to integrate it. And the reason why this is so important, because a lot of times we hear something like, oh, just get rid of it. I want to get rid of it. And I get that, right? Having had back pain in this example for 20 years, of course, I just wanted to get rid of it. But if you think about that energetically, what is that saying? It's saying, I don't like this. Therefore, you're judging it. And we all know that what we resist persists, what we judge gets more energy. So every time we try to get rid of something, we're actually giving more energy to the problem. And this obviously is not what we're really looking to do. So the other part of that is, I think, we're everything. We're just as much fear as we are love, as we are anger, as we are silliness. We're everything. We have full capacity. And healing is about getting to a place of wholeness where we can befriend all these parts of ourselves, learn how to do that in the process, and then actually be in the flow of life without arguing anymore, right? Because a lot of times, like, I don't like this, I don't like this. Well, this is okay, but I don't want it to happen this way. Well, those are our own mind's ideas. And if they're not what is, we're just fighting life. And I think energetically, we can all see how that doesn't work. So the whole idea of getting rid of something to me is impossible. Now, granted, like we said earlier, if it's not yours, sure, we can do that through that right process. But when it comes to blockages that are ours, getting rid of it is not the right energy for me. Again, not the right energy. Whereas integrating it, leaning into it, learning from it, even blessing it and honoring it, it has to change it. If you think about it, my favorite analogy, this might be really helpful, is think about an ice cube. Once it's in its freezer and it's in a cold environment, it's going to stay as an ice cube. And let's just say you want it to melt and you take it out and put it in your sink. You're not going to sit there and watch it the whole time. And you're not going to say, I hate you. I don't like you in that solid form. I want you liquid. Damn it. No, start melting. It's going to do what it's going to do based on the energy around it, meaning in this case, the temperature. And just by changing the environment, it goes from a solid to a liquid. The blockages and the energy in our body is not that different. It gets maybe more solid is the way to look at it when there's a lot of anger and fear, et cetera, blockages. And we want to try to melt that. So we change the environment around it based on our internal sense, and hopefully with a practitioner who can do this as well. When we honor it, ask it, what are you here for? Is there a message? Really be with it and even bless it. The love, which I think is what we're really describing here, is what transforms it from what some call lower vibration to a higher vibration. And I've seen this not just in pain relief of physical, emotional, spiritual symptoms, but just in life. It's basically saying, how can I love what is? Well, at some point, hopefully, right, we realize not loving what is not helpful. It's really that simple. The mind is going to hate this. It might already hate this conversation. Change the channel or whatever. Put it on pause. But stay with me. I promise. It gets really awesome. It's I haven't thought so yet. So the idea is whatever we can add love to is going to become higher in its vibration. And you're in a beautiful, loving relationship. When you're in your heart, your partner feels different about themselves. You create a different environment. My invitation is, can we do that with even things we don't like? Because they're there already, whether in our body or in someone else. And only by adding compassion, acceptance, and even unconditional love to a situation is it really going to change. So it's very different energetically than get rid of it. And what I found is, again, it kind of retrains the body, retrains your mind. And I've noticed just by doing this the last few years, I'm just totally in the flow. Things just happen now. And even if it's something I don't like, I'm going to step back. I'll have my initial hissy fit, right? Nothing wrong with that. I don't think it's just being human. Then I catch it, whether it's a few seconds or a few minutes or whatever later. I say, okay, is there something here for me? And really feel in, and then really listen to what comes back, which is never going to happen if we're just trying to get rid of things. I don't like it. Get rid of it. Again, I get it. You're sick. You don't want that. And yet, kind of like before, looking at things a different perspective, what was a burden can become a gift. And I would bet that many people listening to this right now have already known this at some level. We just might not be doing it as consistency as maybe we could. That in that a lot of our most challenging, difficult situations, as long as we stayed with them, did our work around it, led to something really wonderful. In fact, you can even say, did anything wonderful ever not, was it never not preceded by something really challenging? This is just life. It's up and down, and we can try to fight it. We can try to squeeze it in and try to micromanage it. And I just haven't found it conducive for healing.
I love this distinction that you're making here between, fighting against something and trying to push it away versus really just embracing and being in that moment, having our feelings about it, having our triggers about it, but then getting into curiosity is what I hear. That's like the word that seems to come forward. Is that really what you're talking about here?
Absolutely. Yeah. Perfectly said. And shorter than I said it.
Well, one of the things I'm curious about, and maybe this is, my own bias, but there might be other people out there who have this question. And I've heard about sort of return to sender. Like if I'm holding my father's anger, I want to release that and return it to him. It's his responsibility. It's not mine to do. Do you think that empaths ever feel guilty about doing that? Like, okay, this person's already struggling, they're already angry. Now I'm sort of amplifying that by returning it. What have you noticed about that dynamic?
Absolutely. Great question. When I first intuited this information, I basically said, what? You want me to give what? Back to who? Oh, hell no. Right. And then I had to really sit with that and say, wow, that is really egotistical. Right. Like, to think that it's my job to hold something for someone else. I'm actually depriving them of a potential growth opportunity. Uh, B, that I think I can / should. Completely ego, right? It's like it's um, it's just not in alignment what I found with what I found to be true. So yes, of course, it can bring up guilt, fear, even shame. But through the process where I'm guiding someone to give it back to that other person, we actually ask the questions. For example, will you be okay if I give this back to you? And if the answer is no, we look at that. That's what we said before about the target, right? What is actually going on there? Is it their resistance? Is it the client's resistance? Is it a combination? What's actually happening? So whenever we hear like a no in that example or more guilt comes up, I look at it as an invitation for a deeper level of healing, um, which is, I think, a good thing, right? So another perspective shift, right? So if we're doing this process and things are really flowing, everything's great, and all of a sudden it doesn't seem to be flowing, sure, we could say, oh, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like this guy. Whatever the mind comes to, or we can say, why did I stop there? What's actually happening? Is it maybe a fear? Do I have a fear of stepping forward? Do I have a fear of stepping into the unknown? Which actually is one of the biggest reasons we don't heal. The body, the mind, we like to stay with what's familiar, even if it's not really healthy. For those that have been in long-term relationships that you've known that have been over for a while, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's true in other areas as well. We seek familiarity and comfort, and we kind of shun and push away the uncertainty. And I'll paraphrase Pema Chodron, the great Buddhist teacher, where she said, the mind is always looking for security in an inherently insecure world. I think if we really get that, we can start saying, what would happen? And then start asking questions. What would happen if I stepped into this new way of being? What if I dipped the proverbial toe in the water and then saw and looked around? How does it feel? Right. So we have to go through that process to make it happen, and then truly process the fears that don't let us step forward. And another thing that's really important to remember with this is, in my experience, we can't reason with our emotions. So if we look at fear as an emotion, the, parts of ourselves speak different languages, left brain, right brain, or more logic versus emotion. When you try to outwit an emotion, the emotion says, you're right. It just doesn't have the capacity. It's like trying to talk to a pre-verbal infant. They're just energy and emotion at that point. There's not a lot of linear capacity. Our emotional body is not much different. So when we try to micromanage our feelings, what typically happens over the long haul, especially, is irritability or even anxiousness. Right? So a lot of people I work with who have that diagnosis of anxiety have been trying to micromanage, keep grief, for example, in a little box, right? Where I say, let's open to it. Let's actually embrace it. The more you embrace it, the more you can get through it quicker and with with more ease. The resistance to the grief is what causes a lot of the pain and illness. So again, it really goes back down to, how do I get into the flow of life? Besides all the things that I've been taught, grief is no good, it's not sexy, it's not cool, blah, blah, and you name it. We've all heard these horrible stories about it. And yet, for me, grieving is how we heal any kind of loss. It's like the emotional immune system, it's that powerful. And if we're blocking it, we get physical aches and pains. I know this very clearly because when I work with people, I can feel and say, okay, you haven't expressed grief around this loss from this time. And then we process and actually go through it rather than trying to reason with it. Oh, I shouldn't feel grief. I didn't like that person anyway. All these things in mind it's going to come up with, and then really be with it. The symptoms vanish and they don't come back because we're working on the root level. That's a lot there.
Well, I'm so glad that you brought grief forward into this, because it occurs to me as you're talking that we are just in a constant state of letting different things go, or transitioning from one job to another, one relationship to another, one self-identity to another.
Mhm.
I mean, loss is really just sort of the nature of being a human, in this physical vessel, in this physical world. So would you say, Dave, that going through this process and learning how to just open yourself to that grief and process it and integrate it then helps you in the future when we will have other grief and other losses?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Then we learn to befriend these parts of ourselves, these very natural, organic, innate parts of ourselves. We really befriend them and understand that they are our friends and they're there to help us. Absolutely. When more grief inducing situations happen, and they will happen, that's just part of life. We can definitely, in my experience, go through it a lot quicker. But we don't want to bypass. We've heard this phrase, spiritual bypassing or emotional bypassing. That's what we are saying before with different words, trying to get too logical about it. And that's just the mind basically saying, you know what, I don't want to feel my grief because if I do, someone's not going to like me or it's not cool. Or big fear is I'll never come out of it. So those that have had even minor bouts of depression, once you get out of it, there's this typically and understandably a fear. I don't want to go back to that. Strangely, ironically, and perhaps unfortunately, that resistance is what makes us go back to that place more than not. Whereas if we can open to it, embrace the whole range of emotions, and then we become emotionally fluid. And to me, that's where the health is. Where we allow the grief when it's there, allow the anger when it's there. And ideally, not at someone else, of course, but not hold it in either, because that creates blockages within. If you express it, sometimes you might ruin a relationship or two, depending, of course, how you say it. But if you process it first and then have a conversation with someone, it's a lot different than just going into what the mind typically does, which is the blame game. You made me feel this. Well, maybe what's more accurate is I'm feeling this and you triggered that for me. And it's an end result or a remembrance of something similar from some time prior. Then I know it's not your fault, right? Then I know I can really process that on my own. So I really think ultimately, if we can, if we're open to the possibility, which I think is more than possibility, that pain and illness more than not is an end result of blockages of emotions, whether they're our own or someone else's, then it just makes sense. We should befriend them. And it makes even more sense that we have to face them head on for a true healing, as opposed to the mentalization game that we often do. And that's not to put down talk therapy. I know some people might interpret that way. I don't mean that at all. I really feel everyone has a place. Talk therapy, physical therapies, there's a place and time for everything. And a lot of times we should be doing all of them, right? Sometimes we get a little insular in our healing, right? No, I just want it to be this thing. Well, for example, if someone comes to me with a tumor, I'm happy to help work with them on the energetic, what might have been part of the cause of that happening. But I'm also going to say, you need to go to Western medicine and get that removed. There's a time, again, time and place for everything. And, even medications, if you need them, you need them, right? If you need them and the doctor says take them, I think it's be smart to do so. At some point, that you might start questioning, okay, is this really working or not? And it might be working, it might be helping you in the short term, but I think we're all seeing more so now that long term, it might not be as effective. In other words, it might not be getting to the root of what's going on. It might be kind of masking it. And again, these are things, individual things that each person has to determine on their own. Someone needs a med, take your meds, right? Do what you need to do, but also lovingly question the process. Is this really helping me get to the root? And can I even work with the root right now? Sometimes things are just so overwhelming that we can't. So take the meds for whatever you can until you're in a better place, and then start working with the root with someone who ideally understands the mind body connection, like we're talking about.
Yeah. I love the distinction that you made there about, you made me angry or you made me, anxious or this situation versus saying, wow, I'm recognizing that this is bringing something up inside of me that has not yet been healed, not yet been faced or integrated. And this is an opportunity. And that is such a huge shift between sort of life is happening to me. I'm the victim of this. And of course, sometimes we are victims of things, but holding that energy, as you're talking about, is that resistance. And then saying, getting into that curiosity and getting into those questioning allows us to bridge and to uncover that onion, maybe layer by layer. Well, I know, Dave, that you have been in this field. You were really literally one of the early pioneers of empath, as there were a few people really talking about this, a couple of decades ago. I know you have a lot of resources and a lot of support systems for people who are highly sensitive. Can you talk a little bit more about where summit participants can find you and how they can get connected with your work?
Sure. Well, the best thing to do is just go to my website, which is my name, davemarkowitz.com. No dots, no hyphens, just all one word. And you'll see that there's plenty of links to free videos, courses, private sessions, of course, books, and just kind of feel around and see if it feels right for you. I also do 15-minute consults, so if someone's not sure, I'm happy to do a quick reading for someone to see if what I can offer will benefit that person. And just anything it takes to become more, I don't know if the word is confident, but open to this practice being helpful. I'm happy to answer those questions. Of course, there's an FAQ uh, section on the website too, and the private sessions page, which can help a lot of people get their answers. But if you wanted something more personal, totally open to do a consult and see what's best for you. And if I feel like, or if I intuit that what I have is not going to be helpful, I have absolutely no problem telling the person that. Why would I want to waste someone's time and money and my energy? It's like if they need something else, they need something else. It's nothing personal.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much. And I just wonder, as we start to wrap up this conversation, if there are people out there who are listening right now who've been struggling with illness or pain or fatigue or whatever that may be, what's their first step? How do they begin to tap into this ability to heal and to integrate or to release and return to sender? Where should they start in this whole process?
Right. Great question. I mean, everyone's different, so it's hard to say 100%, but first own what's happening in your body, that there's a reason for what's happening. And you may not be aware of that reason yet. Maybe that's the key thing is yet. And I know you want to get better yesterday. I can appreciate that. I've been in some down places myself and I would have done anything to get out of them quickly. But the reality was I wasn't capable of doing so at that time until I really learned what was happening through these steps. So be patient, try to be self-loving and self-compassionate. And from that place, I like to think that you're might be more intuitively guided to work with a particular person, to get a particular book, hold the intention of I don't know. Because from a place of I don't know, then you can literally let yourself be informed. If you think you know what's going on, think you know what to do, and granted you might be right, that's great. What would happen if you really surrendered the mind's idea of what this is about, who to blame, where to go, and allow yourself to be guided intuitively? You may just find yourself walking in a bookstore, and I've heard this many times where people walk through a bookstore and my book will like literally fall off of the shelf, hit them in the leg, and then they're like, oh, this must be something here. As an empath and sensitive and intuitive, I think we can all relate to that messages come to us and they come when we're more open to them. So I would say surrender, be in place of I don't know, be okay with that. It's just the mind that needs to know things and maybe let yourself be guided to the next step as opposed to having a sort of set, rules that you need to do this first or this next. I think that way we get the really best results for what we need as an individual, right? Because that's who we are. I mean, we're all connected, sure, but there's also individual needs. And if you trust that the universe has your back, even if you've had a really hard life, I get how that can be a little bit more challenging. And I can't just tell someone, oh, just have trust if they're not trusting. But I can just invite the question, what would it look like if I did trust? What would it look like if I said, I don't know, and allowed myself to be informed? And maybe a book falls off a shelf. Maybe they stumble upon this summit maybe you're walking by someone, has a random conversation, they're talking, it's, oh, that's for me. The universe has its ways of getting through to us. And I like to believe that maybe at first, there's a little knock on the door, and if we don't answer it, eventually the universe will knock your door over, but with love, right? So heed what you feel, um, and practice your intuitive abilities. I think as a sensitive, you already have them. You may have kind of clamped them down a little bit because maybe it's too much is coming in. But through the processes that I talk about in my book, and of course through the work I do, we can sort of fine tune those abilities and really increase our abilities to intuit what's necessary. It's one of the side effects, actually, of working with me. People come for particular pains or illness, and a lot of times people say, "Wow, I'm feeling a lot more," or "I'm feeling guided a lot more," and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and the way I interpret what you're talking about now, and thank you so much for this message, is if we've been the ice cube that's cold and rigid, allow ourselves to melt a little bit, to be more fluid, to open ourselves to those possibilities. And that's how the process starts. Thank you so much, Dave, for coming on the summit, for lending all of your expertise and your wisdom. We're just so honored to feature your work here, and appreciate, everything that you've done to be a healer and an advocate for people like us. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. Appreciate it. You're very welcome. And thanks to you and everybody at Shift for putting this on.